Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Shubh, and welcome to Marvel Episode 12. So this is the beginning of the end, essentially. We're going to be talking about Avengers Infinity War. What was the greatest crossover event in cinematic history at that point. So before we get into the movie in detail, I just want to go quickly over some of my broad favorite things about this film, I suppose. One thing is that, so far we've discussed a lot of villains, and Marvel villains are really great because most of them we can level with at some level, I suppose. With Killmonger, for example, we understand where he's coming from because what he's talking about is actually quite poignant. Here as well, with Thanos, he is, at the end of the day, doing this for what can be construed as supposedly environmental stability, not just for Earth, but the universe in its entirety. He talks about overpopulation and overindulgence with resources, and that's definitely something that's very contemporary and pressing at our time. He reconciles with himself by convincing himself that he's making a better future for the half that will survive eventually. And through that, we sort of reconcile with that ourselves. Thanos, he kills people he doesn't know, but the heroes also have to do the same thing. With them, it's making that same sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice the life of one more for the benefit of the rest? Thanos just does it on a grander scale. Why this movie works for me is that, everything finally comes together here. This is 20 movies, 10 years worth of films, all leading up to one moment. And obviously, because of that, they have to do a bunch of fan service, you have the Wakanda moments for the fans of Black Panther, you have Thor's re-entry. I remember that. I think I teared up at that moment. The collective gasp of an audience when Iron Man is stabbed because there was so much speculation about Robert Downey Jr.'s future as Iron Man coming into this movie. And, it all made me realize this is a movie that you can't not watch in a theater for the first time at least, because there's something about being in that hive mind, that collective conscious while you're sitting and watching and experiencing the story together that allows you to connect with other people on a completely different level. It's a beautiful experience, honestly. Now on to a couple of questions I had about this film, because not everything about this movie is perfect. It's a movie at the end of the day. What are movies without flaws? Because flaws are a part of life, I guess. Is Doctor Strange the bad guy in this film? And I know this is far-fetched because you have to give him the benefit of the doubt because he knows what the future is going to be, and he has to sort of be responsible for ensuring that 1 out of 14,605 chances comes true. But really, does he have to? I'm sure there must have been one way out of those 14,605 where he could tell someone about the future, and that kind of happens. But, I guess it all works out in the end eventually. As well as, because Thanos is now essentially a god with all the Infinity Stones, instead of wiping out half the universe, why not double the resources? I guess Thanos was a misanthrope. I guess he didn't like people very much. There's so many characters in this movie, though. So many storylines, so many loose ends to tie up. And it can be hard to care for all of them. But Marvel does that really well in this film. They've always been good at splitting storylines for the most part. But, it's important still to have watched and, experienced the movies that come before this to get a full experience of this film, because there's so much fan service, like I said, especially for those who've been loyal and watched all of these movies. And for me, having watched all of these movies in such a short span of time, there's so many things you notice now, even in like the early movies, that come into play in this film. It's quite an experience. Some of my favorite moments in this film are the Chris Pratt and Chris Hemsworth moments in the ship, the Asgardians of the Galaxy moments. I guess it works for Chris Pratt because he's been known as the sort of goofy, butt of the joke type of figure, and that was his character in Parks and Rec. He was the everyman that you can relate to, and for Guardians, he became sort of the movie star, Chris Pratt. Putting him next to Chris Hemsworth as Thor, though, who's an actual god. It brought Chris Pratt back down to the level that we know and love him for, and he was allowed to play off that sort of persona a little more. And I think this is one of his funniest performances as Star-Lord. Another thing I like about this is the writing process, actually, because that scene was written, or at least touched up, by James Gunn and Taika Waititi. Because the screenwriters, they had, come up with this script and passed it along to the people who'd already been developing these characters for years, because they had a better idea with them. That's why all of these actors, have the freedom to improvise on set and sort of play with lines and dialogue a little bit. The fact that it was James Gunn and Taika Waititi doing the punch-up on that particular scene makes it all the more likely to be just incredibly funny, and I guess that's exactly what happened. But at the end of the day, inevitably, that's going to be funny for you in a second, this film is about inevitability. We follow all of these characters for 10 years through their complex journeys, all the deaths and triumphs and sacrifices that they've made. But what Infinity War says is that it doesn't matter what human will says. It doesn't matter how much you do. At the end of the day, what's inevitable will prevail. This movie ends like the final episode of a tense season-long battle, and we're waiting for season 2, episode 1 to come out. That's what I love about it. I loved that year of speculation where no one had any idea what was going to happen. Then Endgame came out. What a feeling it was to finally see it on screen, the culmination of everything. In some ways, I was sort of underwhelmed, but I'll talk more about that on our next episode. Let's get into the movie itself in detail. For context, everything leading up to now means that Marvel Studios has pretty much perfected the superhero film formula. They did so in 2008 with Iron Man, honestly, because that film set the standard for what these movies were going to be like. They were all going to be fun, they were going to be colorful, they were going to be faithful adaptations of their source material. This is a winning formula that Marvel Studios has used consistently, and now it's probably the biggest blockbuster producing studio in Hollywood. There's even a chance, honestly, that Marvel movies might be the only movies we see in theaters for the longest time. Phase 1 of the MCU began with Iron Man and ended with The Avengers. That the Avengers united 4 superhero movies and their characters and it was a sequel to 4 of these films. But it stood on its own as just incredible entertainment. It's got the promise of the interconnected shared universe that had been, such an important part of comic books, always, but never really saw the screen properly. The Avengers also perfectly sort of blended that sci-fi aspect with fantasy from Thor and other adventure, all on that sort of team-building formula. That was sort of really just like a winning formula. The Avengers and all of Phase 1 really opened the doors for Marvel to be more experimental with, their movies and such. So after the Avengers, Phase 2 took Iron Man, Captain America in very bold new directions. They added the niche property Guardians of the Galaxy, and all of these movies got great acclaim and success, maybe except Iron Man 2. And after this, we had the second Avengers film, Age of Ultron. Age of Ultron wasn't as successful as the Avengers, it was flawed, but it sort of, let's say it doesn't deliver the same excitement from the series as the Avengers did. And there was no sort of sense of culmination. There was no real change that we experienced. Obviously, there were some new characters introduced, but Age of Ultron, it didn't expand or do anything to the MCU. It didn't change anything. So, after 3 years of the most groundbreaking concept of superhero team-ups, you got an unexciting concept. So, Marvel was in a bit of a stretch, so they, pushed to continue changing the boundaries of superhero films, becoming more niche, with a lot more genre mix-ups, like Ant-Man being a heist film, Doctor Strange with the psychedelic visuals. They became more diverse and socially conscious with Black Panther, and a lot more comedic, with James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy movies, Thor Ragnarok, Spider-Man Homecoming. But they also broke apart the main Avengers in their next big collaboration film, Captain America Civil War. And this is when Phase 3 began. So Phase 3 positioned the third Avengers movie to feel like an event again. They had an opportunity to add newly introduced characters, expand the world of the MCU, and close off loose ends. It could do what the Avengers did, but on a much larger scale, because it has 18 films to draw from rather than 5, and so much more confidence, and confidence sort of in themselves, but also behind them, that's created from a decade of just incredible success, unprecedented success. These filmmakers trusted their storytelling instincts. When the Avengers introduced the concept of a crossover film, Infinity War introduced the idea of an event superhero film. When characters cross over into other comic books, like Thor coming in Fantastic Four or Ghost Rider appearing in Spider-Man, it's a very common occurrence. There's team-up books like the Justice League and the Avengers, and they were built around the idea that groups of these heroes have shared adventures outside of their individual ones. But events are these large-scale stories that play out in their own limited series. There's, regular ongoing narratives, but when that event comes, and while it's occurring, everything else stops. That event is the most important story going on. Events, they have a really wide variety of characters from so many books coming all together. And the consequences often change the status quo of the world at this point. We discussed this when we spoke about Winter Soldier, because, Captain America dies at the end of that storyline in the comics. Steve Rogers, that is. And Bucky takes over the mantle. Of course, Captain America is then resurrected. But that's a flaw in comic books. If the Avengers and Age of Ultron are film versions of team-up books, then Infinity War and Endgame, these are the events. They draw from more than 20 other MCU movies and drastically change the characters to open up a huge world of possibilities for stories to move forward with. There was a run of comic books in 84, 85 called Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. It's the first event comic. It was 12 issues of the most popular heroes and villains fighting against each other for the amusement of what is, I guess, a godlike figure. And it was conceived to promote this new toy line. DC also did this with Crisis on Infinite Earths in 85. It's a storyline that brought together different versions of DC characters from all the decades of their storytelling into one continuity that was a lot more reader-friendly. Crisis had perfected this idea of the comic book event. And both companies have published so many since, almost one per year. To name a few, DC has published Final Crisis in 2008, Infinite Crisis in 2005, The Death of Superman 1992, Flashpoint most recently, well, maybe not most recently, but most memorably recently, Flashpoint from 2011. Marvel, of course, has the Infinity series, the Infinity Gauntlet, and Infinity War series, but of course also House of M, Secret Wars, Secret Invasion, Civil War, and a lot of these events featured Thanos and the Infinity Gems. Both of these concepts were created by Jim Starlin as part of his highly influential storylines for Marvel throughout the 70s. Thanos first appeared in Iron Man 55 in 1973. He's a powerful being, he's from Titan, which is a moon of Saturn. Thanos is defined by his nihilism and worship of death in the comic books. Like, he literally falls in love with the physical embodiment of death, which is why when Hela appeared in Thor Ragnarok, people were sort of theorizing that Hela might be the woman that Thanos falls in love with in Infinity War. But yeah, Jim Starlin introduced the Soul Gem in 72 and then expanded the concept into 6 gems, each with specific powers. And Thanos collects all 6 of these, and a collection of Avengers and cosmic heroes defeat him, turn him into stone. And that is a 1977 storyline with Thanos.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
In 1990, Starlin resurrected Thanos in Silver Surfer and started the Infinity Gauntlet event. At this point, Thanos again gets all the gems, now they're called Infinity Gems, and he uses them to eliminate half of all life in the universe. All of these heroes and powerful cosmic entities attack Thanos, but Thanos defeats all of them this time, and because of the sort of overwhelming celestial power of the gems. Some of the remaining heroes use his insecurities to overcome him, and eventually the universe is restored. But Infinity Gauntlet provided a lot more of the inspiration for Infinity War and Endgame. Its scale made it one of the few stories that could provide sort of climax for the scale of the MCU. Thanos and the Infinity Gems, which was They were named the Infinity Stones for the films. They were layered into the MCU from a very early age. The Space Stone was introduced at the end of Thor. It's in the Tesseract. And it appeared in Captain America, the Avengers, Captain Marvel, as well as the Yellow Mind Stone, which is introduced in the Avengers, but then it's also put in Vision's head in Age of Ultron. There's a quick shot of Thanos in the mid-credits teaser at the end of the Avengers. It was very short after the Avengers that Kevin Feige, who's the man behind the scenes pulling the strings, who had a story retreat to solidify the plans of eventually what would become the Infinity Saga. There was an overarching plan developed for how Thanos and the Infinity Stones would factor into these future films, and how the first 20 or so MCU movies would end in a massive 2-film climax featuring Thanos and the Stones. So in 2014, Marvel Studios introduced their upcoming films, including Infinity War Part 1 in 2018 and Infinity War Part 2 in 2019. Obviously, these names were changed. Meanwhile, the Reality Stone was introduced in Thor: The Dark World. The Power Stone was introduced in Guardians of the Galaxy. So was Thanos. He also had a moment to shine in his cameo in Guardians of the Galaxy. And the Time Stone was introduced in Doctor Strange. This is all the groundwork, the sort of loose planning for this climax. But, the real sort of work in these films didn't begin until the sort of lead creative team for this movie fell into place. And that, comes with its own sort of drama. In the lead in to Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon announced that he was leaving the MCU. And then after spring of 2015, Joe Russo and Anthony Russo and the writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely were hired to sort of move forward with the next Avengers movies. All 4 of these people have collaborated on Captain America movies, Civil War and Winter Soldier, and they also sort of did a lot of touch-up for a lot of other scripts. Civil War had featured most of these characters, so these filmmakers were already prepared for the prospect of juggling all of them for an entire movie. Writing began in 2015, and everyone agreed on the fates of Tony Stark and Steve Rogers at the end of the film. The second one, at least. They agreed that the first would end with Thanos winning, assembling all 6 stones, and eliminating a half of the life in all the universe. These decisions then informed what would become the second film, which was to be called Avengers Endgame. Pretty straightforward. The first film, Infinity War, proved to be so much more difficult. You have to have the mechanics of Thanos going around all of space to get all the stones, defeating all the heroes, achieving his goal. The filmmakers decided, obviously, that Thanos, it had to be his movie. He's the hero of the film. This is Thanos' movie. Infinity War is largely from his perspective, and that's why he wins. Positioning a villain in this way, it's a very interesting way to write a superhero movie. The structure of the film, it then settled into a sort of smash and grab heist movie. Thanos, he goes around space relentlessly acquiring all the stones in a very short period of time, and the heroes are just always one step behind him. And it focused the film sort of making the very unwieldy cast and so many years of continuity manageable. Because if a character beat or a story element is not related to Thanos' quest, it didn't make the film. And that allows the focus on Thanos to save Infinity War from becoming the overstuffed mess that it was supposed to be, it was feared to be. And it gave the film a sort of pace that was closer to Mad Max Fury Road than to any other superhero movie. Obviously, it's a risky choice. You have to make this genocidal maniac a supervillain, the protagonist of the biggest superhero movie ever at this point. And it's the sequel for 20 pre-established superheroes. Thanos is a fascinating character, though. He's a sociopath, but he's righteous, and he's philosophical about his plan. He has total conviction, and it makes him terrifying, but also impressive. He's already been introduced in earlier films, so the filmmakers really had to dig deep to find his motivations and portray them realistically. As for the superheroes, Infinity War shows them challenging Thanos with all their might, but failing. And this sets up a more ingenious conflict in Endgame. The filmmakers juggled this cast by breaking them into small groups, finding these very interesting pairings. The conclusion of Tony Stark's character arc from selfish jerk to selfless hero, which tracks so well from the 7 movies before this, begins in Infinity War and ends with Endgame. Thor's story sort of mirrors Thanos. He would be the central character of Infinity War if he succeeded. Bruce Banner, he also sort of merges with Hulk in very interesting ways, and that's an arc that begins in Ragnarok. Banner is a perfect example of an arc that was cut short. So that would be obviously his romance with Black Widow, and it's completely disregarded as irrelevant to Thanos' quest. In the same vein, Natasha and Steve Rogers are very minimized in this film. Their bigger moments come in Endgame. Hawkeye doesn't even appear in this film, and other characters really only appear in service of the Thanos story. Given to someone else, there would have been so much more effort to sort of increase the role of Steve Rogers or even Black Panther because of their popularity. But the directors and writers, they wanted to avoid this because that streamlined Infinity War by focusing it around Thanos. As these two films were developed, they began to feel more distinct. The first film would be fast-paced, it would be action-oriented. It follows Thanos as he completes his mission. The second would be a more drawn out, expansive look at dealing with loss and failure and destiny, following a very different pace and structure. These films are very closely related, and obviously they are sequels to each other, and they're telling the same story, but Thanos' victory at the end of the first movie is not a cliffhanger, but it's a definitive ending to the first film. The second film deals with the consequences of that tragedy. Hence why I say that this is like a season finale, because it's culminating one story. All of these things, the way that the heroes develop over 20 films, 10 years, it all culminates in a message that you cannot avoid the inevitable. But Endgame deals with the fallout of that, because that's how it ends. Thanos says, "I'm inevitable," and Iron Man says, "I'm Iron Man." But yeah, anyway, to sort of mitigate the difference between the endings and the sort of stories that these films, the sort of style of stories these films would tell, Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2 was dropped, and they got their own names. Avengers Endgame, the name would be released 2 years later. As Phase 3 of the MCU sort of started to play out, Joe and Anthony Russo started to work with a lot more MCU filmmakers to ensure the consistency of characters across the films. Scott Derrickson was around for Doctor Strange. James Gunn executive produced Infinity War and consulted about Guardians of the Galaxy. Taika Waititi, who completely changed Thor's tone in Ragnarok, helped smooth out Thor in Infinity War. Say that 4 times. Thor in Infinity War. They were initially planned to be filmed simultaneously in 2017, but sort of reorganized back-to-back to accommodate schedules and finish the remaining work on the Endgame screenplay. The shoot was a full year, January 2017 to 2018, and that didn't include reshoots. Infinity War shot at the same time as Black Panther in Atlanta, so allowing the depiction of those characters and Wakanda as well to be consistent between the films. Can you imagine? Chadwick Boseman was battling cancer and filming two of the biggest superhero movies of all time. That's incredible. But the bulk of Infinity War wrapped production in July of that year, 2017, and the filmmakers started post-production on Infinity War with the production of Endgame. So that was another amount of juggling and collaboration. So this sort of collaboration, the scheduling, like genius of how this was organized with so many people involved. There's a crazy amount of collaboration and scheduling. And this is what makes it such a perfect climax to the MCU. So many people worked to make this the way it was. There's so much passion behind it. You can feel it in the film. Ultimately, Infinity War is defined by its scale, its focus, and its pace. The Avengers changed the superhero team-up film, and Age of Ultron didn't really do much, but Infinity War balloons the scale from less than 10 years to over 20, including Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Black Panther, Guardians of the Galaxy. The film embraces all the magical, cosmic elements of these characters, expanding the more grounded, earthly Avengers films into space, and also the MCU into space, which is why so much of Phase 4 is going to be based in space. But bigger, not necessarily better all the time, and a lot of sequels fall into that trap. But what focus these filmmakers had on Thanos as the central character of this film, that allowed them to streamline it, really, really, really serves that this film is as good as it is. It creates that dizzying pace and sort of leaves out a little bit of time for exposition and character development outside of Thanos, but that's sort of what Endgame is for. That's why these films are so different. If Infinity War has one flaw, as I said, it's the expectation that you have seen and remember the 18 films of the MCU that come before this. You can't really explain new things to the viewers because there's so little time and the pace is so fast, and there is a risk of alienation. But that's all balanced out by the rewards that they give to their loyal, long-time fans. So do watch all 18 movies, or at least the good ones, the important ones. As indicated by box office grosses, obviously there was a lot of fans that rewarded Marvel for this, but over the 10 years before this, most viewers made up their mind on whether or not to engage with the MCU, and Infinity War wasn't really going to attract new fans. Luckily, the MCU had a lot of fans at this point. So the flaw really wasn't a flaw. It increased the scale, there was a focus, breakneck pace, the iconic ending, and how everything just came together to make this movie succeed, but not just succeed, like defy everything in an unprecedented success.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So, let's go through the movie sort of beat by beat. The movie opens with the audio of a distress call from an Asgardian spaceship that came under attack from Thanos, played by Josh Brolin. It's a fun little Easter egg. Kenneth Branagh voices the distress call. He was the director of the first Thor movie. The goal of the opening sequence is to establish the supervillain credentials of Thanos. It's to introduce Thanos as a character. He has the purple power stone already, last seen in Guardians of the Galaxy, and has ravaged the Asgardian ship in search of the space stone. He stands over Thor and Loki, who are already defeated, and his primary henchmen, the children of Thanos, the Black Order, I believe they're called in the films, stand nearby. Ebony Maw, played by Tom Von Lawler, he thinks about, he sort of butters Thanos' bread a little bit. Loki starts to distract Thanos enough for the Hulk to attack him, but Thanos destroys the Hulk, with ease. As he dies, Heimdall, who is another Asgardian, sends Hulk to Earth to warn everyone. Loki hands over the Space Stone, but then he tries to kill Thanos. Thanos uses the power of the stones to kill him, and then strangles Loki to death. So to summarize, the first sequence of this film, Thanos defeats two of the strongest Avengers, kills the villain of the first Avengers film, and acquires 2 Infinity Stones. Already you know that he's a force to be reckoned with and is confident enough in his power to remove the armor for the rest of his film. Thanos, he sends the Black Order instead of going down to Earth himself to retrieve Earth's Infinity Stones and then blows up the Asgardian ship. On Earth, Hulk crash lands into the sanctum of Doctor Strange, and instantly the music changes. We get the Doctor Strange tags starting to play in the background. He reverts back into Bruce Banner and then warns Doctor Strange that Thanos is coming, and that's the opening. It wastes no time. It hits viewers with a dizzying amount of characters and concepts, and 2 deaths. This is when the title card starts to play, and the pace just continues. Tony Stark is jogging with Pepper Potts and discussing the wedding and having kids, and finally settling down, and they're interrupted when Doctor Strange and Banner appear through a portal. Since the event of the Avengers, Tony has been driven by a fear of attacks from space, and with Thanos, Tony finally finds the source of his fears and defines this fight as his ultimate purpose. Tony and Doctor Strange are a very fun pairing because they're essentially the same person. Their first solo films are very closely mirrored. They both tell the story of a brilliant douche who is humbled and pushed to become a lot more heroic and selfless. They're both still jerks. That personality doesn't leave. And they go at each other constantly through this film. There's a plan that forms around protecting the Time Stone that Doctor Strange wears in a pendant, and the Mind Stone from the forehead of Vision. Most fans assumed that Infinity War would address the sort of conflict between Tony and Captain America at the end of Civil War, but there's no time to deal with all of that, as they bring all of these characters together. Tony decides that Steve can protect Vision, and he protects Doctor Strange. But before that can even begin, a spaceship with Ebony Maw and Gull Obsidian, played by Terry Notary, arrives over Greenwich Village, and they attempt to take Doctor Strange's stone. Banner tries to change into the Hulk, but the Hulk refuses, and Hulk is upset because he's always used to fighting Banner's fights, and this is the time he chooses to protest. It's a callback to the moment in Thor Ragnarok where Hulk becomes Banner after about 2 years and sort of explains that he's worried that he's never going to be able to be Hulk again. There's a subversion of expectation in the fact that Hulk doesn't appear for the rest of this film, so Banner has to be heroic without his alter ego. The spaceship catches the attention of Peter Parker in a different sequence, who jumps out of his field trip from a school bus to help, and as Tony surmises, he's from space, and he came to steal a necklace from a wizard. Once again, there's a volume of characters and a complete lack of exposition. It's a drawback for new viewers, but the pacing of the film is one of the greatest strengths. Ebony Maw, he captures Strange, takes him to the spaceship, and leaves Banner and Wong behind. Peter and Tony get into the spaceship, and Peter is given the Tony-designed Iron Man suit to survive in space. The Iron Spider suit, and they go off to protect the Time Stone. Now you have Thanos established as a formidable villain, the heroes beginning their rally against him, and the film is off to the races. It pretty much doesn't pause now till the end. The early sequences and the following introductory sequences, they're fairly dense. As the filmmakers, they try to work efficiently to sort of introduce the massive cast and place them in their groupings, establish their goals and the locations of each stone. And here it develops its 5 major narratives. You have Tony and his team protecting the Time Stone, Steve's team protecting the Mind Stone, Guardians of the Galaxy protecting the Reality Stone, and Thanos searching for the Soul Stone, and Thor seeking for his weapon to defeat Thanos. The film, it cuts between these narratives with some ending before others, and these groups merging as the film sort of freights on towards its finale. It's a testament to the writers, the directors, the editors, and that each narrative and each goal remains clear throughout all this intercutting, and the fast pace sort of smooths over any of the rough edges. For the rest of the film, everything is about Thanos or preparing for Thanos. The next narrative begins with a funny card that says space, and a funk song from the Spinners plays. Now we know we're heading into the Guardians of the Galaxy storyline. That's another thing about this film. It employs the use of music to sort of establish the worlds that we're entering and exiting. Infinity War transports the Earthbound Avengers into the cosmic realm, and the Guardians are the main cosmic characters in the MCU, so it's essential for these groups to be integrated very seamlessly. So, with the help of executive producer James Gunn, director of the Guardians films, this film sort of retains the look, the tone, the humor of the Guardians. The team starts to investigate the Asgardian ship looking for a lucrative rescue or salvage opportunity, but they find devastation until Thor literally smashes into their windshield. He wakes up and he's single-minded about his mission to create a weapon to kill Thanos. Chris Hemsworth walks a very interesting line because he's balancing his very obvious grief from his character's recent tragedies with classic male macho bravado. But also acting as a straight man in the comedy of the Guardians. It's a fantastic performance. It's just the strongest in the film, honestly. And Peter Quill and Star-Lord, the leader of the Guardians, he's instantly jealous and insecure as his team sort of fawns over the godlike newcomer. He attempts to one-up Thor's tragedies. He speaks in a deep British accent. And mostly this is beyond Thor's notice. It just goes over his head. He then goes and commandeers their escape pod along with Rocket and Groot, voiced by Bradley Cooper and Vin Diesel respectively. and goes off to make his weapon while asking, or ordering really, the Guardians to protect the Reality Stone. Another Guardian, Gamora Zoe Saldana, she was forcibly adopted by Thanos as a child and trained as a warrior, and after, he massacred half of her planet. Before she betrayed and left Thanos, she learned the location of the Soul Stone and kept it secret. And she's terrified, essentially, that Thanos might try to squeeze the information out of her and insist that Quill kill her if they failed to defeat Thanos. Quill, who's her boyfriend, he agrees, but reluctantly. And the scene is obviously in true Guardians fashion, undercut by a beautiful moment of comedy with Drax, Dave Bautista, the funniest character in this film, by far, standing nearby claiming to be rendered invisible by his slow movement. I'm moving so slowly, you can't even notice. Hi, Drax. Damn. Yeah, that's a great moment. The group arrives at the last known location of the Reality Stone to find it abandoned, except for Thanos and the Collector, played by Benicio del Toro. Thanos is looking for the stone, and Gamora uses the opportunity to attack. And after she apparently kills Thanos, it's revealed that he acquired the Reality Stone and created it an illusion to lure Gamora in with it. This is a nice visual cue because every time he uses a stone, it unleashes an energy that's the same color as the stone. He also has to snap his fingers to use any power that gives him the sort of limitation. After hesitating, Quill shoots Gamora as he promised, but Thanos turns the blast into bubbles. So he escapes with Gamora and her secret of where the Soul Stone is. Meanwhile, on Earth, specifically in Scotland, Wanda Maximoff and Vision enjoy their secret getaway. The Mind Stone gave Wanda her powers, and it's now part of a Vision, so they have a connection, and that connection blossoms into a romance that we're going to see on TV pretty soon. So after, they learn of the spaceship landing over Manhattan, Vision is attacked and badly damaged by the Black Order. Him and Wanda hold off the attack long enough for Steve and his team to arrive and save them. Steve, Natasha, and Sam Wilson, Falcon, they operate as the perfect fighting team, driving away the Black Order. Seeing Steve appear behind that train and having the music cue for the Avengers play behind it, very good touch. They look different, they look worn out, they look slightly disheveled. Steve Rogers has got a beard now. He's been operating 2 years underground since Civil War, but everything is, dire enough to convince him to put aside any issues with the government or the Avengers, and they take Wanda and Vision to the Avengers headquarters in upstate New York, reuniting with Rhodey and Banner. Vision suggests that Wanda could use her telekinetic power to destroy the Mind Stone, killing him, but keeping it from Thanos. But Banner suggests that they should attempt to remove it first. The only facility that's capable to do this is in Wakanda, and that sets up this storyline. It's all business, and it sets up the major battle of the third act. As the heroes start to rally to oppose Thanos, Infinity War zeroes in on its main character. Thanos is a horrible genocidal monster, but the film makes its best effort to explain his perspective and the righteous conviction behind it, which makes his efforts more frightening, but also it allows us to sort of identify with him in a very weird manner. His planet, Titan, became overpopulated and ran out of resources. He suggested to cut the population in half, but obviously that was rejected, and then devoted his life to carrying out this plan at a much higher scale. Thanos truly believes that he can save half the lives in the universe by killing the other half, and that the survivors will be grateful. He's calm, he's measured, he's philosophical, and through the strength of his conviction, it makes it all deeply horrifying. He discusses these things with Gamora on his ship, And after years of living with him, Gamora understands that he's insane, cares for nothing. And ironically, that's what makes Thanos care for her. Her strength and forthrightness impress him. Thanos knows that Gamora hid the location of the Soul Stone because he tortured the information out of her adopted sister Nebula, played by Karen Gillian, when she had tried to assassinate him. Zoe Saldana has a lot of very interesting material, and she does her best with it, but Gamora, not very well served. She's supposed to be conflicted. She's supposed to be angry about her abusive childhood, particularly about Thanos and Nebula, but she comes off as weepy and weak. She reveals the location of the Soul Stone, and right after Thanos tortures Nebula, trading her sister's pain for the lives of trillions. Not that it's a bad thing, but it's an example of the sacrifice that must be made for progress, at least in the perspective of Thanos, because that's what this film is. It's from the perspective of Thanos, and all of these characters have been placed with these choices that they failed to make. But that's the message. It's important to care about that one life, because even that one life matters. It's what Mission Impossible is all about. So the Soul Stone, it's on the planet Vormir, where it's guarded by the Red Skull. Throwback to Captain America, the First Avenger. He's voiced by Ross Marquand. He takes Thanos and Gamora to the top of a cliff where the Seeker of the Stone must sacrifice something he loves. And Gamora laughs because she can't imagine Thanos loving anything, but Thanos just has a tear in his eye because everyone knows he loves her. And he throws her off the cliff and gains the Soul Stone. You're supposed to have some sympathy for Thanos at this point because it highlights the price that he has to pay to achieve his goal. Functionally, however, the sequence, it reduces a female character that was once strong to just a mournful sacrifice that furthers a male character's plot. This is nicknamed fridging in comic book storytelling. It's an endemic and it's problematic. And it's kind of uninspired storytelling crutch that's used quite often. No one would have thought twice about Gamora's fate. As it stands, it's a weak spot in Infinity War, and even worse when the filmmakers sort of doubled down on the sequence in Avengers and in Endgame and do it again. A sacrifice is needed for the Soul Stone, so killing Gamora makes logical sense, but the writers could have written a different way to acquire the Soul Stone, one that didn't fridge a female character. But, weak spot aside, Thanos only needs 2 more stones, the Time Stone and the Mind Stone, guarded by Avengers. On Ebony Maw's ship, Tony and Peter save Doctor Strange. It leads to the first MCU meeting of Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, the greatest creations of Steve Ditko, who died very shortly after the release of this film. Tony and Strange, they debate on whether or not to return to Earth to defend the stone or continue on the ship to Titan to ambush Thanos, and they decide on the latter. But Doctor Strange makes it clear that he values protecting the stone over anyone's life, specifically Tony's. Nebula escapes from Thanos' ship and contacts the Guardians to meet her on Titan. After Tony's ship lands, he meets the Guardians, and they have a very funny first meeting. It ends when they realize that Quill is from Earth and they're from the same side. This is home to the very classic, who is Gamora? Where is Gamora? No, who is Gamora? I'll do you one better. Why is Gamora? It's a great moment. They strategize an ambush, but Tony's leadership, which is smart, contrasts with the Guardians' irreverent attitude, and it leaves Tony in a very rare state of speechlessness. There's a joy in seeing these well-established cinematic worlds collide, and it fulfills the potential of a shared universe. This is exactly why the Avengers are such pleasurable movies. They give the Infinity War movie just so much exciting energy. I enjoyed seeing Iron Man, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Star-Lord bantering while Drax and Mantis toss in hilarious lines. Strange uses the Time Stone to explore 14,605 possible outcomes of the conflict. but only sees one where they win. And this leads to the third act. This is where the assembled heroes finally face Thanos and his forces directly. Steve and his team, they arrive in Wakanda. He reunites with Bucky, his childhood friend, who was healed by Wakanda after the events of Civil War. None of this is spoken. There's no time for it, but you just know. Black Panther and his lead bodyguard Okoye fortify the city with an energy dome to hold off Thanos' forces, as his brilliant sister Shuri, played by Letitia Wright, attempts to extract the Mind Stone from Vision. If the heroes are able to hold back the attack long enough, the stone can be removed and destroyed by Wakanda, and this prevents Thanos from ever acquiring all 6 stones. It's fascinating to watch Infinity War right after Black Panther because, the Black Panther is a deep and socially conscious blockbuster, but Infinity War is this epic event film. But T'Challa and his world, they're so versatile. They can exist brilliantly in both. Eventually, led by the Black Order, this army of faceless alien creatures start to attack the energy field and slowly break through and threaten to flank the heroes, so T'Challa opens up a part of the shield to keep the attack focused. And this is where the battle trope of opposing forces running at each other and across a field is seen, with the added touch of T'Challa and Steve just sprinting ahead of the pack as the most skilled fighters. All the human fighters get a showcase, including Banner operating the Hulkbuster suit, because the Hulk still refuses to come out and play. But I've forgotten to speak about Thor. I just said that this might have been his movie, but I barely spoken about him. Thor's been following his own hero's journey the whole time. Rocket tries to cheer him up when it's clear that Loki's death, his father's death, the destruction of Asgard, his mother's death, everything is bringing him down. So, dead brother, yeah, that can be annoying. Thor attempts his usual bravado and bluster, but we see him reach his limit. He says that if he's wrong about defeating Thanos, he has nothing to lose, and there's a tear that runs down his cheek. Chris Hemsworth has a fantastic performance in this film. If his quest succeeded, like I said earlier, this would be his movie. They arrive at Nidavellir. This is a dwarven weapon factory powered by a dying star. It's dark and it's empty except for Eitri, played by Peter Dinklage, the last dwarf left alive. Even as a giant, he's still a dwarf. Thor forced the dwarves to make him a gauntlet powerful enough to hold the stones, and then killed everyone except Eitri. Thor convinces him to make Stormbreaker, which is a powerful axe capable of killing Thanos, and he realigns the rings of the Forge in space by holding onto the rings and a cable attached to Rocket's ship. He then holds open the arras that focuses the power of the dying star and takes a brunt of the energy long enough for the axe to be forged. Eitri says obviously that this will either kill Thor, to which Thor replies, only if I die. And then he says, yes, that's what killing you means. I didn't like that joke, but a lot of people did. And, it's an example of the use of humor in a lot of dire storylines. Thor's actions at Nidavellir, they play out like the mythological stories of godly labors. It's set up for him to triumph against Thanos. It's supposed to be his hero's journey, but in retrospect, everything about this sequence makes the tragedy of his failure so much more acute, and you sort of understand why he ends up the way he is in Endgame. Thor nearly dies from the heat, but the axe is completed, and the handle is made from Groot's branches. The power of the hammer revives Thor, who arrives triumphantly on the battlefield in Wakanda. He's fully powered, and it gives the heroes the cheer and the Black Order to pause as Alan Silvestri's iconic Avengers theme plays over the score. I'm tearing up thinking about that moment. I had goosebumps. It was so cool when Thor comes in. There's lightning in his eyes, and then you can just hear bam, 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 bam.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Seems to build from this point, and you feel like the heroes are going to pull off this last minute victory. The audiences expect this from every blockbuster. There's great character interactions when these battle unfolds. Rocket wants to get Bucky's metal arm. Groot only speaks "I am Groot" to Steve, who says "I'm Steve Rogers." Natasha, Okoye, Wanda, they combine forces in the very classic pandering female empowerment moment that comes in every one of these combination movies now. I'll talk more about this in the Endgame episode because I have a lot more to say about this moment in Endgame. I feel like it is gratuitous, and obviously it's not my place to comment on how women should feel about this, but personally I think it's disingenuous the way Marvel do those little girl power scenes. Vision, he's attacked and left undefended. So Banner and Steve rush to help him, and the Black Order are fully defeated with just Thanos left. And it seems like they almost have it. Thanos then arrives on Titan. He's visibly weighed down by the cost of his mission. So the heroes launch their ambush, and they combine their powers to assault Thanos and keep him from snapping his fingers and hit him from all the angles. And Nebula arrives just in time to help. Thanos is on the back foot. And then Mantis drops onto his head and manages to subdue him just as Tony and Peter begin to pry the gauntlet off his hand. And then everything as it goes to hell, Quill realizes that Thanos killed Gamora and punches Thanos in the face, which frees him from the sleep spell from Mantis, ruining the plan and leading directly into Thanos' ultimate victory. Some characters could reasonably be blamed for Thanos succeeding, but there's an actual argument to be made about Peter Quill. Chris Pratt's image was done serious harm by this character choice. It seemed silly, but attitudes toward him never seemed to really recover after that. Thanos, he collapses a moon onto these heroes. Most of them get knocked out. Strange uses all of his magic to fight this beautiful, visually arresting battle, but even he can't compete with the stones, and it finally comes down to a fight with Thanos and Tony. This is Tony's big fight. This is the fight that he's been dreading for all these years. It's the fight to protect Earth that he's been planning for 6 years. He makes a good showing. He earns the respect of Thanos, and he makes him bleed. He makes Thanos bleed. But Tony loses. Thanos stabs him with his blade, and Strange saves Tony's life by giving up the time zone. It seemingly assures Thanos' victory, but in retrospect, having seen Endgame, Strange, he knew what he was doing. He was playing the long game. He says, "We're in the Endgame now," and that line was added in reshoots after the sequel was titled. In Infinity War, Strange's capitulation, it's shocking. Now Thanos has 5 stones in his hand. He becomes unyielding. He teleports himself to Wakanda easily and not even casually, just bats away all of the attacks he faces as he strolls towards Vision. Audiences have been trained film after film to expect things to seem hopeless in the climax right before the heroes pull it off. At this point of the Avengers, the audiences had no reason to expect any different. The heroes always win.
But Thanos is the hero of this film, and that's why he wins. Wanda is forced to destroy the Mind Stone and she kills Vision, but that doesn't matter. Thanos, he uses the Time Stone to reverse time, reconstituting the stone. And then Thor's arc culminates with his axe flying out of the trees, countering the power of the stones and just embedding itself in Thanos' chest. Thanos was almost defeated by Tony's team, by Wanda destroying a stone, and by Thor's axe. All major obstacles, but he overcomes them. Thor loses sight because Thor fails because he lost sight of the mission, and he attacks Thanos in the chest. He wanted to savor slow revenge, but Thanos says that he should have gone for the head, and we're instantly transported into an orange tinge of Vision. There's a young Gamora asking him, what does victory cost? And he says everything. The gauntlet melts around his burning arm and Thanos retreats, and the film ends quietly. No score, just subtle wind and thunder. People begin to turn to dust, half the people. Bucky, many Wakandan warriors, T'Challa, Groot, Wanda, Sam, Mantis, Strange, Quill, and finally Peter. Peter and Tony, they develop a father-son type of relationship over several films, and Peter's death is drawn out to bring home the weight of the failure to Tony. Peter says he doesn't feel good, and he doesn't want to go. He says he's sorry, and then he goes into dust. And obviously it's extended because Downey pushed Holland's performance on set, insisting that Peter is a scared child, using all of his power to hold off the inevitable. The death obviously became iconic, but really the whole sequence is instantly iconic and shocking. The snap is our generation's I'm your father moment. It's a devastating loss for the heroes. It ends Infinity War on a down note. Endgame is the follow-up film. It's the highest grossing film of all time, and it's built entirely around the fallout to this moment. Eventually, they will win, but at this point, all hope is lost. The filmmakers, they plan to cut to Clint, a retired Avenger, as the snap takes his whole family, showing the cost to the outside world. But this was smartly moved to the beginning of Endgame, and Infinity War ends with Steve just saying, "My God," and cutting to Thanos smiling at his accomplishment in the porch of his cabin. The ending is stunning. The credits roll over somber music. There's no extra scene, no mid-credits. The filmmakers wanted audiences to sit with what just happened. Infinity War has much in common with another major blockbuster that was released, and I sort of recoil at myself when I say this, but Star Wars: The Last Jedi. They both deal with a very difficult theme of failure, and it makes them more thoughtful than most blockbusters. But both largely refused to deliver what fans expected. They minimized or altered fan-favorite characters and challenged the audience with their story choices. Whereas The Last Jedi became very divisive online. Everyone praised Infinity War. It's very easy to understand why. There's a relentless pace and sharp focus in Infinity War that made the experience more overwhelming, harder to nitpick. It assembles 20 heroes, culminates storylines through 18 films over 10 years, but it doesn't feel bloated or overstuffed. It's a miraculous feat, and it's very difficult to criticize. And so many audiences were so familiar with Marvel films and this steady stream of reliable, high-quality entertainment that, there's trust in the filmmakers. But Infinity War, it was a beloved cultural event. It was marketed as the conclusion thus far. It's a can't-miss spectacle for anyone who's ever seen a single MCU film. There's an angle that succeeded here in terms of marketing, that Endgame was just another big conclusion film that came a year later, and it still played off of the same message. Everyone knew that there was more to come, that characters like Guardians of the Galaxy, Spider-Man, and Black Panther would not remain dead. But people reacted to it still as intended. The snap became iconic. It launched memes all over the world. Marvel became a dominating fake presence in blockbusters, and their reign continues as Thanos' victory did. Infinity War was originally scheduled to be released in North America on the 4th of May, but it was brought a week ahead to ensure a simultaneous worldwide release, preventing leaks and spoilers. It also contributed to feeling like a worldwide event. The film earned $258 million in North America and $641 million worldwide on its opening weekend. Record grosses. It went on to earn $679 million in North America, earning less than Black Panther, selling fewer tickets than the Avengers, but still a massive amount. And worldwide, Infinity War earned $2 billion. It's the fourth highest grossing film of all time. The MCU, over decades, had built to become the most reliable brand in blockbusters. The success of this fast-paced, massive-scale, viewer-unfriendly film is a testament to the success of the entire series. And they weren't done yet. The heroes needed to win. The dead needed to be resurrected. Thanos needed to be defeated. But that's for next time. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review. You can also follow us on Twitter at GSMC_movies. Thank you for listening. This has been Shubh, and see you in the endgame.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.